Welcome to the Teach Better Talk podcast, your official podcast for the Teach Better Podcast Network, the hub for all things education, brought to you by teachbetter.com. The Teach Better Talk podcast is committed to answering your burning questions through a variety of lenses and bringing new offers to you and your colleagues to help you thrive throughout the school year. My name is Ray Hewart, and we love your questions here on the pod. If you have any questions that you'd love us to consider as topics for future episodes, please share them with us by emailing info@teachbetter.com. Our topic this week continues to be focused on media literacy. How can we support our students in this literacy journey? Before we get too far in, I want to give a big old shout out to team member Sarah Jesse. Sarah Jesse is a part of our bloggers network and a part of the Teach Better team. She is the one that makes the artwork for all the blogs over at teachbetter.com. So for those of you that always feel enticed to click on a blog image and get reading because of the beautiful words of the author, big shout out to Sarah Jesse for that design work. She is also a literacy instructor and somebody that is in the classroom full-time working with 7th grade students. So we are so fortunate to have her. Another expert that we are featuring here on the pod today is an incredible gentleman. I cannot believe that we got here on the pod. Howard, how are you feeling?
Excellent.
I am so overjoyed that you said yes to being featured on Teach Better Talk podcast, because I reached out to you thinking that I wasn't going to hear anything. I was like, he's going to give me crickets on the other end. And yet you responded. And I am so appreciative that you're taking a few minutes to talk to our Teach Better community.
Always for educators.
Always for educators. I love it. Friends, if you are not familiar with this work, get ready, buckle in. This is going to be a pod that you are going to listen to numerous times. Howard, do you mind sharing a little bit about what you do and the work that you do in education? Okay.
I'm 77, so I don't want to make that too long.
I mean, we could go year by year here. It's no big deal.
Well, I was a professional writer. I always wanted to be a writer since I was a teenager, and I started in my 20s, and I will share you how I got there, but I ended up writing about these new digital media that started emerging in the late 1970s, personal computers, and then the internet. And I happened to live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and this is where it was happening and when it was happening. And in particular, I've always been interested in using technology to expand our ability to think and communicate. I did a thesis at Reed College on neurofeedback, which turned out not to be what we thought it would, but it's something I've always been interested in. And when I met Doug Engelbart, who may or may not be familiar to your audience, if that name is not familiar to your audience, you should go to YouTube and look for the mother of all demos, because he demonstrated everything we're doing here today: video on a screen, but also hypertext and the mouse, word processing. So he was interested, as nobody else was at that time, in using computers to augment human intellect. Everyone thought computers were for doing scientific calculations or business data processing. So I've had this long-standing interest in the pros and cons and the benefits and pitfalls of using technology to expand our minds, our ability to think and communicate. So I wrote a number of books. One of them is called The Virtual Community, that really foresaw what we now call social media. I wrote that, that was published in 1992. When I was a writer, I wrote about the future, what might it bring? And I tended to be about 10 years ahead. So in 2000, I wrote about what I foresaw as the convergence of the telephone, the personal computer, and the internet. And I called that book was Smart Mobs. They're both in print. Thank you, MIT Press, for keeping them in print. And So this gets into our story. I wrote other books, but I'm just talking about the ones that are really relevant here. My daughter's now 40, but when she was in middle school, before Google, this must be maybe 1996 or 1997, she was using search engines. They had search engines called Ask Jeeves and InfoSeek back then. And I felt it necessary to sit down with her and say, and look at the computer together and say, it used to be that you wanted to find the answer to something, you would go to the library and you would find a library book. There was an editor and a fact checker and a publisher. There was the librarian who ordered the book and the teacher who assigned the book. All of those authorities were guarantees that what you were going to read was accurate, was true. Now you can ask a question online. Of course, back then it was before the mobile phone. Now you can ask a question anywhere at any time and get a million answers. It's now up to you, the seeker of information, the asker of the question, to determine whether what you find is accurate or not. And back then, I used a site called martinlutherkingjr.org. I think they've been so outed that it's not really useful anymore, but that was a site that proposed to be about Martin Luther King, but was actually run by racists. And so I asked my daughter, well, how would you find out if this is real? And well, it's pretty easy to do a couple of things. One is go search on the name of the author and see what others have to say about it. Anyway, that's something that kind of percolated. And since I've been writing about these technologies, I have been asked by critics and scholars and others, are these tools from the personal computer to the internet to social media to the mobile phone, are they good for us as individuals and as communities and as societies? And around 2010 or so, I decided the answer to that was, it depends on what we know. Of course, there's a teacher's answer for you. It's not really a secret. And people like you and me, and probably all of the people who subscribe to this podcast, they know what to do with social media. But I'd say that most people don't. The vast majority of people don't. There was some survey quite a few years ago, maybe 12 years ago, that showed that college students thought, well, if it's on Google, it must be true. That's still true of a lot of people, although I think it's not as widespread as it was back then. So thinking that way, I thought, well, if people knew just the basic literacies, it would be advantageous for the knower. They would be able to succeed. And if enough people had that knowledge, it would improve the whole internet. It would improve the comments, to raise the level of accuracy on the comments. So I ended up writing a book in 2012. So that was, 12 years ago. It's still relevant, called NetSmart, how to thrive on the internet. And so there are a number of things that it's useful to know, but I concentrated on 5 basic literacies. And I later taught this class at Stanford. I created the class. It was on social media literacies. I taught another class on social media issues, and maybe we'll talk about that as well. But the 5 literacies, the first ones are kind of in order. Attention. I don't think I need to elaborate on the crisis of attention that's going on these days. The good news about that is we are vulnerable to manipulation of our attention because most people are not trained at all in it. I said that was good news. The good news is you can learn to do that. And in everything from modern cognitive science to ancient meditative traditions offer some ways, using the breath is a good one. And I can elaborate on some of the things that I did with my students regarding attention, if you want to circle back to that. Crap detection was the next one. I stole that term from Ernest Hemingway, who said that every good journalist needs to have an internal crap detector. So how do you determine what is accurate online? Participation was the next one. And of course, that's what distinguishes digital media from old broadcast media. In broadcast media, there were a few people who determined what we read in newspapers, what we heard on the radio, what we saw on television. Now, 2 billion people can talk to 2 billion people. It's called many to many. And if you know how to participate, that is not only useful for you, but that's where everything came from. Facebook was invented in a dorm room. I could go on. Much of the digital media came from people who were enthusiasts, and many of them very young, and they knew how to participate. And there's so many different ways to participate online. Collaboration is the next one. This, of course, is something that I've been writing about for a long time. If you go back to the virtual community, one of the things that excited me and still does is that if you give people knowledge, you will get 10 times back if you know how to do it. That's called social capital. It was one of the social media issues I taught to college students. So it's like having an instant global think tank. Again, you got to do your crap detection, but there's a lot of collaboration about knowledge, but there's collaboration about making things. The web itself was not invented by the government. It wasn't invented by a corporation. It really started out with a lot of people putting up pictures of their cats and dogs and linking to each other. If it hadn't been for all those people, then the governments and the corporations wouldn't have jumped into it. So collaboration is a powerful affordance of the new media, and there are many ways that you can do it. And the last one was network awareness. We don't live in an information society or a digital society. We live in a network society, and we lived in a network world before online networks. In sociology, there's a whole field called social network analysis that looks at the connections between people. So networks have characteristics, and the kinds of networks that you participate in and the way you participate are important. So having that knowledge, again, gives you a kind of advantage. So that's kind of the very quick 50,000 foot overview of that. I have a Google Doc with the syllabus that I've used, and a syllabus that's suitable for high school as well. I'll give you the URLs for that, but I'm trying to make this as widely available as possible. I'll have to say that 12 years later, I don't see high school students, or I would prefer middle school students, being told how to search properly. I don't really see these being taught, and I don't really see a massive proportion of the internet learning these literacies. Nevertheless, all teachers are eternal optimists. I'm hoping some of the teachers that are paying attention to this will pick up on that and start doing it with their students. So that's what I feel is really important. So maybe I'll just briefly touch on social media issues. I don't have a higher degree, and the reason I have been invited to teach at universities is because I'm sure many of your listeners know this. It has to do with your publications. And the publications cite the publications that they were built on. And it turns out that kind of the root publication for cyberculture studies, as it's now known, was a 1987 article I wrote called Virtual Communities. And you can still find it online. So I was invited to teach digital journalism because they needed somebody at Stanford. That was really a transition period before what has really happened to journalism, largely because of the internet, was really beginning then. And I saw that the students, they didn't all know how to use online media that well. So that was part of what I taught them. And so I proposed to the chairman of the department that I teach a course on how to use online media. And he said, no, you have to have a syllabus with texts. So then I started thinking, my daughter was a freshman at Stanford. I guess we call them first years now. And at the first year I started teaching there. So she was kind of my informant on that. I came up with a number of issues that students like my daughter were encountering in their online world, but weren't being taught. So there's connections to legitimate college level texts about things like the public sphere, which is important politically, or social capital. I mentioned that. Presentation of self, the way you present yourself online. There's a classic sociology text called Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, long before the internet. But the fact that you act differently with your parents and your peers, or that original text used the example of a waiter in a restaurant that's going to act differently in the kitchen than in front of the customers. Well, this has a lot to do with how you present yourself online. And again, networks was part of that. So I taught the social media issues course, and that enabled me to start teaching about what was first called virtual communities. The word social media didn't exist yet, and then it became social media literacies and social media issues. And Berkeley saw my course and asked me to come do it over there.
You know, Howard, I could truly, I'm even just reflecting on our conversation thus far. I just want you to know, I could talk to you all day. The way you speak, first of all, is like, I'm so sucked into this conversation, and your vast knowledge base in looking at this topic is fascinating. I very rarely get to talk to somebody as incredible as you. I have a little bit of a funny story to tell you, but I'm going to wait until we transition to our next segment. So friends, don't go anywhere. I cannot wait to get Howard's thoughts on this. We'll be right back.
Quick pause to talk about the Teach Better Power Standard Protocol. Yikes. Standard prioritization is important, and this is the method we use to identify and select the most essential and relevant elements from a set of educational standards. This is for each educator in each grade level, in each subject area. This process helps educators and curriculum developers focus their efforts on teaching and assessing the key components and skills that are most crucial for student success. Head over to teachbetter.com/professional development to learn more about this prioritization process.
How do we teach digital literacy, and why is it important? Where did this concept come from? Howard has already dove into a number of different things, and one of my favorite components of our conversation thus far is that he has referred to about 1 million resources that you can go become an explorer in this content area. Not only that he's written, but that he also continues to refer back to. Howard, when I was getting your name, I just want to give a big old thank you to the internet, because I did not know about this work that you are sharing with us today. And I know we have even more topics we're not going to be able to get into that you've been a part of, like the concept of co-teaching being such a relevant part of the work that you continue to do, but did do in your career a ton. I have to tell you, I went to ChatGPT, an AI tool, and I said, if I'm going to interview an expert in digital literacy, who should I interview? And it gave me 10 people, and you were number one.
Huh.
Well, I have to tell you, as funny as it is, hearing these stories about all this reflection and writing and research that you've done, the internet sure thanks you for it, because even with my silly Google search that I did on a Thursday afternoon while sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, your name comes up as a leading expert and somebody who has tons of resources, a must interview on the podcast. So again, I want to thank you for being here on the podcast. As we continue to reflect on digital literacy, I know a lot of people are really fascinated with this concept of teaching it better to their students, which I know you've already touched on. If a middle school teacher, an elementary school teacher, high school teacher, if they're listening right now and they're saying, oh my gosh, I'm in, you've convinced me. How do we teach our students even to do something as simple as an effective Google search? Where do we begin? What are your thoughts there?
Well, there's actually a good book about that now. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. It will come to me, but they have something called the SIFT method. And essentially what that Sam Weinberg is one of the authors, and Mike Caulfield is the other author, both of them higher education educators. But to boil it down too far, I would say you get off the site that you are looking at and do lateral searches. So look again, search on the author's name, search on some of the claims, look at their bibliography and check some of their sources. But really, that just is the surface of this. I would really recommend going to that book. But I think there are a number of internet hoaxes. I mean, back in there was the tree octopus was another one besides the Martin Luther King Jr. And so find some of those, show them to your students, see if they can figure out whether they're for real or not.
Well, and I really value that challenge, because as we get into this, not only have we been able to provide a number of resources, just like this book you just referred to, as something that an educator could read on their own. I'm sure you can grab it at any book realtor or Amazon. But this could also be a very valuable book study to do with a group of educators, maybe even involve a leader in your building to kind of go through this type of research with and ask those questions, be reflective. But another thing you provided is some of those playful opportunities to get students involved in the concept. I love referring back to the tree octopus. That's going to be a really funny idea that you're going to bring to your students and say, hey, this was just discovered. Do you think this is true? And go through the process of either solving or debunking this concept to really get students excited about the importance of this work as well. Howard, I know a lot of our podcast listeners are going to be hungry for more strategies. Unfortunately, we are about out of time. So I am going to give us one quick transition, and then we're going to be sharing 3 major takeaways from this conversation. I know everyone's going to be bummed we have to end it early, but I want to make sure they reach out to you and connect with your work. So we'll include that as well. Stick with us. This conversation could go on for hours, and thankfully we have the ability to have that be the case. This podcast will just be the beginning. We want to make sure that you connect with all the resources that we've shared and also get some key takeaways. Howard, if I was to ask you maybe 3 major takeaways that you hope our community takes away from this podcast episode specifically, what comes to mind?
Well, I'm going to have to leave out a whole lot of things that I would have said.
I know, we had a whole list of things.
Well, let's do another one.
Okay, we're doing another one, friends.
Well, I guess the first takeaway is that it's really a responsibility of educators personally to try to engage their students with thinking critically about life online, because we're not really seeing the institutions doing it. I did over 100 interviews with digital media and learning innovators a few years ago, because my experience with universities was that they change very slowly and very conservatively. The people who are really doing the innovations are flying under the radar. And I discovered it wasn't the big name places. It was the small liberal arts colleges and elementary school teachers and high school teachers who were doing that kind of stuff. Read my book, read Mike Caulfield and Sam Weinberg's book. That's a help. But in just engaging them and thinking critically about the issues that I've talked about, about their attention. Gee, we could do a whole episode on that. But there's a good chapter about it in Net Smart. And there are fun exercises you can do with students, young students, older students, about their attention in the classroom. And, the whole issue of laptops and phones in the classroom comes into that. So I'd say that the main takeaway is take the responsibility to engage your students in thinking critically, starting with attention and crap detection. I'd say those are the two most essential. But of course, the others, are important and can be fun. There are lots of fun things to do. I ended up, or maybe we'll preview a future podcast. I ended up having my college students teach with me. I think this could work with high school students as well. It gets them engaged. And I would say one thing that has not come up in this conversation that I feel is just essential, which is trust your students. I know that sounds simple, but so much of the curriculum, particularly around grading, has to do with let's prevent the lazy students and the dishonest students from pulling the wool over our eyes, and you're ignoring all of the students who want to learn and who aren't going to cheat. So I'd say when you trust students and tell them that you're trusting them and give them something to do that's substantial rather than just taking notes for what's on the test, you'll be surprised at what comes back at you. And you know what? If there are 30 students in the class and 5 of them just don't get it, you've done a real service to those other 25 who would have been ignored if you were trying to teach the lowest common denominator of trustworthiness.
Friends, there's so many things we could talk about. I'm so glad you heard him here. Howard is coming back for another episode. There's a lot we can dive into. Howard, I love these takeaways, and something I really want to highlight for our community here is choosing to get familiarized with these concepts. While it's good for your educational career and good for your students, this is also just good knowledge for us to have as parents, as human beings, for our own selves on the internet. So this is something that I really like, because sometimes I need an educational resource that doesn't feel like I'm still working on a job. And I think this is going to be a really good outlet for many, many of our viewers. Howard, before we wrap up here, I do want to make sure that our community can stay in contact with you. I want them to know what website to go to. I want them to make sure they know how to spell your last name so that they can find all the resources that we've talked about. And of course, friends, if you ever have any issue with that, you reach out to me and I'd be happy to get you connected to Howard. Howard, where should we direct them?
Well, there's a Wikipedia page if you want to know about me. And these days I make art and I write. And I do it for Patreon. And I don't know if you know about Patreon, but the way that people make money online has to do with advertising. And we don't have to get into it, but that's awful. Patreon is a site where creators can get paid by patrons. You post your work, and a patron will give you $2 or $5 or $10 or $100 a month, and you have a community that you work for. So it's Patreon is Patreon. I'm at patreon.com/Howard Rheingold, HOWARD RHEINGOLD, one word. And you can join it for free, and about half of the things I post are for free, or you could contribute $2 and help me pay for my art. You can see this is my studio here. I do things with electronics and paint and wood. So that's kind of the main site, but also I mentioned the 100 interviews that I did, and that's at the Connected Learning Alliance, CLALLINCE.org, and you'll find my stuff there, and they've got some really good stuff.
Yeah, friends, I have that link available for you as well. That is a really, really interesting set of interviews, and I would highly recommend you all enjoy that as you're, driving to and from work, sitting enjoying your lunch. This is a great resource for all of you to get to. Howard, thank you so much for the robust resources and the lively discussion and the promise of another episode. I very, very much appreciate you.
I am so happy to help other educators always.
So wonderful. Friends, don't forget, if you got this far in the episode, we would really appreciate you subscribing, rating, and reviewing wherever you're listening from, whether it be on Teach Better Talk podcast or over on YouTube on the Teach Better team. Make sure you go over and subscribe. And hey, if you enjoyed the episode, we also love hearing from you. So feel free to screenshot listening to this episode and tag us in the conversation to let us know what question we should talk about next. Have a great day, guys.